A 13-year-old girl stands alone in a frozen parking lot, staring at a text message that will destroy everything she's ever believed about her mother. Tell her the truth, 48 hours. 6 words. That's all it takes to crack open 13 years of lies. Inside Iron Haven Garage, a brotherhood of scarred riders and silent protectors has no idea that the woman who brings them food donations every week is running from a past so dark it could swallow her daughter whole. And when that past comes crawling back through a dead phone screen on a December night, nobody in this town will be safe. Not the mother, not the girl, not even the men in leather who've sworn to protect what's theirs. Stay with me until the very end of this one, because what happens in part 5 will wreck you. If this story hits you, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's ride. The temperature dropped 9 degrees between sunset and the time Nora Mercer pulled her van into the gravel lot behind Iron Haven Garage. She could feel it in the steering wheel, in the way the cold metal bit through her thin gloves, in the fog that crawled across the windshield every time she exhaled. December in Felton Ridge was a specific kind of misery. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a gray, relentless weight that pressed down on everything and everyone until the whole town moved slower, talked less, drank more. Sarah sat in the passenger seat with her knees drawn up, earbuds in, hood pulled low. 13 years old and already perfecting the art of disappearing in plain sight. She hadn't spoken since they left the house 20 minutes ago, and Nora hadn't pushed it. That was the deal they had. The unspoken contract between a mother who carried too many secrets and a daughter who'd learned to stop asking questions that never got answered. "We'll be quick tonight," Nora said, cutting the engine. The van shuddered and went silent. "Just drop the boxes and go." Sarah pulled one earbud out. "You say that every time. And every time I mean it. And every time we're here for 2 hours." Nora didn't argue. She popped the rear hatch and stepped into the cold, her boots crunching across frozen gravel that glittered under the single sodium light bolted to the side of the building. The air smelled like diesel and old snow and something metallic, the permanent signature of a place where engines got torn apart and rebuilt 6 days a week. Iron Haven Garage sat at the edge of Felton Ridge's industrial corridor, a sprawling cinder block building that had been a trucking depot, a feed store, and briefly a county maintenance facility before Knox Barrett bought it 11 years ago for back taxes and a handshake. From the outside, it looked like every other forgotten structure on Route 9. Rusted roll-up doors, faded signage, weeds pushing through cracked concrete. But inside something different lived. Something that hummed with purpose even when the overhead lights were off, and the coffee maker was the only machine still running. The bikers called it home. The town called it trouble. The truth was somewhere in between, leaning hard toward the side nobody wanted to admit. Sarah climbed out of the van and stood with her arms crossed, watching her mother stack cardboard boxes of canned food and dry goods onto a hand truck. The donations came from 3 different churches and a women's shelter that had excess inventory. Nora had been coordinating the deliveries for almost 2 years now, ever since she'd started volunteering with the Garage's community outreach program. It was the kind of work that looked good on paper and felt exhausting in practice. Twice a week, every week, rain or snow or the kind of bitter wind that made your teeth ache. "Grab the small box," Nora said without looking up. Sarah grabbed it. It was heavier than it looked. Canned peaches, bags of rice, a few jars of peanut butter with handwritten labels from somebody's kitchen. She carried it toward the side entrance, where a strip of yellow light leaked from beneath a steel door that didn't quite sit flush in its frame. Inside, the garage was warm in the way that machine shops are warm. Not comfortable, not welcoming, just not freezing. Space heaters hummed in corners. The concrete floor was stained with decades of oil and transmission fluid that no amount of degreaser would ever fully remove. Workbenches lined the walls, cluttered with tools and parts and coffee cups that hadn't been washed in days. 3 Harleys sat in various states of disassembly under fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just low enough to crawl inside your skull and stay there. And the men. Always the men. They moved through the space with a kind of quiet economy that Sarah had never seen in anyone else. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. They acknowledged her with nods or the briefest eye contact, then went back to whatever they were doing, tightening bolts, wiping down chrome, scrolling through laptops propped against toolboxes. Their leather cuts bore the Iron Haven patch, a blacksmith's anvil wrapped in chain, stitched in silver thread against black leather, and beneath it, the names they'd earned or chosen or been branded with years ago. Knox Barrett stood at the far end of the garage, leaning against a workbench with his arms folded across his chest. He was watching Nora unload, though he didn't move to help. He never moved to help with the small things. It wasn't indifference. Sarah had figured that out a long time ago. It was something else. Knox helped with the things that could kill you. Everything else he figured you could handle on your own. He was 53 years old, though he looked older in the way that men who've been through certain kinds of damage always look older. A scar ran from his left temple down past his jawline, pink and raised and impossible to ignore, though nobody at Iron Haven ever mentioned it. His hands were thick with calluses and old burns. His voice, when he used it, sounded like gravel being dragged across sheet metal. Low, rough, deliberate. He spoke maybe 30 words on a good day. Most days he didn't need that many. Nora. One word. A greeting, a check-in, and a dismissal all compressed into 2 syllables. Knox. She set the last box on the table near the kitchenette. Rice is on the bottom, canned goods on top, same as usual. He nodded. That was it. Transaction complete. Sarah set her box down next to the others and drifted toward the corner where Griff Rowan had his workspace. Griff was the club's tech guy. Mid-30s, lean, quiet in a different way than Knox was quiet. Knox was quiet because he'd decided words were mostly useless. Griff was quiet because he lived inside screens and circuits and code, and the digital world made more sense to him than the one outside it. He had 3 monitors set up on a repurposed drafting table, cables snaking everywhere, a soldering iron still warm from whatever project he'd been working on before they arrived. "Hey, kid," he said without looking up. "Hey. Your mom bring the good peanut butter this time?" "I don't know. Probably the church brand." "Church brand tastes like sawdust mixed with regret." Sarah almost smiled. Almost. That was the thing about Griff. He never tried to make her laugh, never performed for her the way other adults did when they were uncomfortable around teenagers. He just said things, and sometimes they were funny, and sometimes they weren't, and he didn't seem to care either way. She leaned against the edge of his table and watched him work. Lines of code scrolled across one screen. Another showed a map with colored pins scattered across it. Some kind of tracking system for the outreach routes, she guessed. The third screen was dark. "What are you building?" she asked. "Donation logistics platform, trying to automate the pickup schedules so your mom doesn't have to call 14 people every week." She'd still call them. "Yeah," Griff said. "She probably would." Nora's phone buzzed on the table near the kitchenette. Sarah wouldn't have noticed it at all, wouldn't have even glanced in that direction, except that her mother's reaction was immediate and violent. Nora's hand shot out and grabbed the phone so fast she knocked over a half-empty coffee cup, sending brown liquid spreading across the tabletop. She turned away from the room, hunching her shoulders as she looked at the screen. Sarah watched. Something shifted behind her mother's eyes, a flash of something raw and cold that Sarah had never seen before. Not anger, not surprise. Something closer to the expression you'd see on a person who'd been waiting for a specific kind of pain for a very long time and had just felt it arrive. "Mom?" Nora shoved the phone into her jacket pocket without responding. She grabbed a handful of paper towels from the dispenser on the wall and started cleaning up the spilled coffee with shaking hands. "Mom, what was that?" "Nothing. It's nothing. Work thing. You don't have work at 9 o'clock at night." "Sarah." The word came out sharp enough to cut. Nora didn't look up. "Go wait in the van." "I just got here." "Go wait in the van, please." Sarah didn't move. She stood there watching her mother's hands tremble as she wiped coffee off a cinder block tabletop in a motorcycle garage at the edge of town, and she felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, not shatter, just crack. The hairline fracture you don't notice until the weight shifts. She walked toward the van, but she didn't get in. She stood in the parking lot with her breath fogging in the cold air and her hands jammed into her pockets, and she thought about the look on her mother's face. She thought about the way Nora's body had changed, how her spine had gone rigid, how her shoulders had curled inward, How her voice had dropped into that specific register that meant the conversation was over before it started. Something was wrong. Not wrong in the way that bills were wrong, or flat tires were wrong, or arguments about homework were wrong. Wrong in the deeper way, the kind of wrong that had weight to it. Nora's phone was sitting on the passenger seat of the van. She must have grabbed her personal phone from the table and left this one, her second phone, the one she used for outreach coordination. Except Sarah had seen her pull the phone from the table, which meant this was the phone she always carried, the one she kept face down on every surface, the one she never left unlocked. It was unlocked now. The screen glowed in the darkness of the van's interior, still showing the notification that had made her mother's hands shake. Sarah picked it up. The text message was from an unknown number. No contact name. No history of previous messages. Just 6 words sitting on the screen like a bomb with the timer already at 0. Tell her the truth. 48 hours. Sarah read it 3 times. Each time the words meant exactly the same thing and nothing at all. Tell her. Tell who? The truth about what? 48 hours until what? She set the phone back on the seat exactly where she'd found it. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed that and found it strange. Her mother's hands had been shaking, but hers were steady. Cold, but steady. She didn't know what that said about her. She didn't know if it said anything good. The side door of the garage opened and Nora came out, walking fast, keys already in her hand. She looked like she'd been crying, though it was hard to tell in the sodium light. Her eyes were red. Her jaw was set in that way that meant she was holding something inside her mouth. Words, or screams, or the kind of truth that would change everything if she let it out. "Get in," Nora said. "We're leaving." "We just got here. Sarah, get in the van." Sarah got in. She buckled her seatbelt and stared straight ahead through the windshield while her mother backed out of the gravel lot too fast. Tires spinning on ice. The rear end of the van fishtailing slightly before the treads caught. They drove home in silence. Not the comfortable silence they usually shared. The kind that came from living in the same small house and knowing each other's rhythms well enough to not need constant conversation. This was different. This silence had teeth. Nora's hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, knuckles white, eyes locked on the road with an intensity that made Sarah think of people bracing for impact. "Mom, not now." "The text on your phone." Nora's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The van surged forward, headlights cutting through the dark between street lamps. "I saw it," Sarah said. "Tell her the truth." 48 hours. The van swerved, just slightly. A momentary loss of control that lasted half a second before Nora corrected. Pulling the wheel back, her jaw clenching so hard Sarah could hear her teeth grind. "You went through my phone. It was open, on the seat. That doesn't give you the right to—" "Who sent it?" Silence. The kind of silence that answers questions better than words ever could. Nora didn't say, "I don't know." She didn't say, "It's spam." She didn't say any of the things a person says when a text message means nothing. She said nothing at all, and in that nothing, Sarah heard everything. They pulled into the driveway of their house, a narrow 2-story rental on Birch Street with a sagging porch and a mailbox that had been crooked since before they moved in 4 years ago. Nora killed the engine and sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at the dark windows of their home like she was seeing it for the first time, or the last time. "Go inside," Nora said quietly. "Lock the door. I need a minute." "A minute for what?" "Sarah, please." Sarah went inside. She locked the door. She stood in the hallway with her coat still on and listened to the van's engine restart. Then the sound of tires on gravel as her mother backed out of the driveway. Headlights swept across the living room wall like searchlights, then disappeared. Her mother was gone. Sarah walked through the dark house without turning on the lights. She knew the layout by feel: 12 steps from the front door to the kitchen, 6 steps from the kitchen to the staircase, 14 steps to the top. She'd counted them years ago during a power outage, and the numbers had stuck the way certain things stick when you're young and the dark feels like something personal. She sat on her bed and pulled out her own phone. No messages, no missed calls, just the home screen with its default wallpaper. A mountain range she'd never visited and probably never would. She thought about the text message. Tell her the truth. Her. Not tell your daughter. Not tell Sarah. Just her. Which meant whoever sent it knew that Nora would understand exactly who her was. Which meant this wasn't random. This was specific. This was aimed. And the 48 hours. A deadline. A countdown. The kind of thing you say when you've already decided what happens next, and you're giving someone one last chance to do it on their terms before you do it on yours. Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. The house was cold. The furnace was running. She could hear it clicking and humming in the basement, but the heat never reached the second floor properly. One of those problems Nora kept saying she'd call the landlord about, and never did. She thought about all the things she didn't know about her mother. It was a long list. Where Nora had grown up, she'd said Pennsylvania once, but the details changed every time Sarah asked. What happened to Sarah's father? Dead, Nora said, before Sarah was born, and the subject was closed permanently after that. Why they'd moved 3 times in 4 years. Why Nora kept a go bag in the back of her closet, a black duffel bag that Sarah had found 2 years ago, packed with clothes, cash, and documents in a name Sarah didn't recognize. Lydia Kessler. That was the name on the documents. A driver's license from a state they'd never lived in. A birth certificate with different dates. A passport that looked real but felt wrong. Sarah had never told her mother she'd found the bag. She'd never asked about Lydia Kessler. She'd filed it away in the same place she filed everything else that didn't make sense. The locked cabinet in the back of her mind, where the questions lived that she wasn't supposed to ask. But now the cabinet was opening. The text message was the key, and it was turning, and she could feel the weight of everything inside pressing against the door. 3 hours passed. Nora didn't come home. Sarah fell asleep with her phone on her chest, and her coat still on, curled on top of the comforter because she was too tired to get underneath it. She dreamed about motorcycles, but the sound of them, the low growl that vibrated through the floor of Iron Haven Garage, the way the fluorescent lights reflected off chrome and made everything look like it was underwater. She woke to the sound of the front door opening at 4:17 a.m. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, heavy, deliberate. Her mother's silhouette in the doorway of her bedroom, backlit by the hallway nightlight. "You're awake," Nora said. "Where did you go?" "Driving." "For 5 hours?" Nora leaned against the doorframe. In the dim light, her face looked hollowed out. The skin beneath her eyes dark, her cheeks gaunt in a way that hadn't been there 12 hours ago. She looked like someone who'd aged a decade inside a single night. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me." "Okay." "There are things about our life, about my life before you were born, that I haven't told you, that I couldn't tell you, that I was hoping I would never have to tell you." Sarah sat up. Her heart was doing something strange, beating fast but also feeling heavy, like it was working harder than it should to push blood that had suddenly thickened. "The text message," she said. "Yes." "Who sent it?" Nora didn't answer immediately. She looked at the floor, at the wall, at the window where frost was forming in the corners of the glass. She looked everywhere except at her daughter. "Someone from before," she finally said. "Someone I thought was gone." "Gone like dead?" "Gone like in prison. He got out 3 weeks ago. I didn't know until tonight." "He?" "Yes." "Who is he?" Nora's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The words were right there. Sarah could see them. They were sitting on her mother's tongue like something bitter, something that would change the taste of everything that came after. "I can't," Nora whispered. "Not yet. Not like this. Mom, I need time. Just give me a little time. I'll tell you everything. I promise. But not at 4 in the morning when we're both exhausted and scared." "I'm not scared." That was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was the kind of lie that 13-year-olds tell when the alternative is admitting that the ground beneath their feet has turned to water, and they don't know how to swim. Nora crossed the room and sat on the edge of Sarah's bed. She reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, a gesture so tender and so ordinary that it made the strangeness of everything else feel even more grotesque. "Tomorrow," Nora said, "after school, we'll talk." "Promise?" "I promise." Nora left the room. Sarah heard her footsteps in the hallway, heard the bathroom door close, heard the water run. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. The creak of old joists, the hum of the furnace, the wind pushing against the windows. She didn't sleep. The next morning, Sarah went to school because that's what you did. You went to school even when your mother's hand shook and your house felt like a crime scene and you had a name burning in the back of your mind that didn't belong to anyone you'd ever met. Lydia Kessler. She sat through math and English and biology, and she wrote the name in the margin of her notebook in tiny letters so small that nobody could read them unless they were looking, and nobody was looking because nobody at Felton Ridge Middle School had ever looked at Sarah Mercer long enough to notice anything. After school, she went home and her mother wasn't there. The house was empty. Nora's coat was gone. Her keys were gone. The go bag in the back of the closet was gone. Sarah stood in her mother's bedroom doorway and stared at the empty space where the black duffel bag had been and felt something close inside her chest like a fist. Not panic. Something colder than panic. Something that lived in the space between betrayal and understanding, where you know the person who was supposed to protect you has chosen to protect themselves instead. She sat on the front porch in the December cold for 45 minutes before she made a decision. She pulled out her phone and searched for the number of Iron Haven Garage. It rang 6 times. Iron Haven. Griff's voice, flat, distracted. It's Sarah Mercer. A pause. She heard a keyboard stop clicking. Hey kid, what's up? My mom's gone. Another pause. Longer this time. What do you mean gone? I mean she's not here, her bag's not here. She was supposed to be here when I got home from school, and she's not, and I don't know who else to call. She heard Griff set something down, heard the creak of his chair as he stood up, heard him walk across the garage floor, boots on concrete, that specific sound she'd memorized without meaning to. Stay where you are, Griff said. I'm coming to get you. The line went dead. Sarah sat on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself and watched the street. A neighbor's dog barked 3 houses down. A pickup truck drove past without slowing. The streetlight at the end of Birch Street flickered the way it always flickered. 3 quick pulses and then steady. 3 quick pulses and then steady. A pattern that felt like a heartbeat with an arrhythmia. 22 minutes later, she heard the motorcycle. Not a car, not a van. A motorcycle. The low, rolling thunder of a Harley engine cutting through the neighborhood like a voice that didn't care about volume or propriety or what the neighbors thought. It came around the corner of Birch Street, headlight burning through the early dusk, and pulled into her driveway with a controlled precision that made the gravel barely shift. Griff killed the engine and sat there for a moment, looking at her. He was wearing a heavy canvas jacket over his cut, gloves, no helmet, which she knew was illegal, but she also knew that nobody at Iron Haven cared much about the parts of the law that only existed to inconvenience you. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't tell her everything would be fine. He just swung his leg off the bike and walked up to the porch and sat down next to her on the cold concrete step, close enough that she could smell leather and engine oil and the faint trace of soldering flux that always clung to his clothes. Tell me what happened, he said. So she told him. The text message, her mother's reaction, the 5-hour disappearance in the van, the promise to talk after school, the empty house, the missing go bag. Griff listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat quiet for a long time, 30 seconds, maybe 40, looking at the frozen street with an expression she couldn't read. The go bag, he said finally. You said it had documents in a different name. Lydia Kessler. She watched his face when she said it, watched for the twitch, the recognition, the tell that would confirm what she already suspected, that the name meant something, that it connected to a world she wasn't supposed to know about. But Griff's face didn't change. He just nodded once, slowly, like he was filing the information away in whatever system he used to organize the things that mattered. Come on, he said, standing up. You're coming to the garage. Why? Because you're 13 years old and you're sitting on a porch in December and your mother's gone and I'm not leaving you here. What about school tomorrow? Griff looked at her. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't flat or distracted or hidden behind a screen. It was sharp, focused, the kind of attention that a person gives when they've decided that something matters enough to drop everything else. Kid, he said, School's not your biggest problem right now. He handed her his phone. Call anyone you need to call. Then we ride. Sarah took the phone. She didn't call anyone. There was nobody to call. That was the thing about her life. The thing she'd understood since she was old enough to notice that other kids had grandparents and aunts and emergency contacts that weren't just their mother's name written twice on the same form. She climbed onto the back of the Harley and wrapped her arms around Griff's midsection. The engine came alive beneath them, a vibration that started in the steel frame and traveled up through her bones until she could feel it in her teeth. The headlight carved a white tunnel through the dusk. They pulled out of the driveway and headed toward Route 9, toward Iron Haven Garage, toward the only place Sarah could think of that might have answers. Behind them, the house on Birch Street sat empty and dark, the porch light still on because nobody had thought to turn it off, burning against the coming night like a signal that nobody was watching for. And somewhere in Felton Ridge, or maybe beyond it, maybe already across a state line, Nora Mercer sat in her van with a black duffel bag on the passenger seat and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing, driving towards something she'd spent 13 years running from, knowing that the 48 hours were already ticking down and that the truth she'd buried was climbing its way back to the surface with hands that would not be stopped. The clock had started, and everyone in its path, the mother, the daughter, the silent riders at Iron Haven Garage, was already out of time. They just didn't know it yet. The garage smelled like burnt coffee and cold steel when Griff brought Sarah through the side door. The fluorescent lights were on. They were always on, day or night, because Knox Barrett didn't believe in darkness inside his own walls. And three men looked up from what they were doing with the kind of practiced alertness that came from years of never knowing who might walk through a door next. Decker was the first to speak. He was sitting on an overturned milk crate near the space heater, cleaning a carburetor with a rag that had been black since before Sarah was born. Mid-40s, thick arms, a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, broken nose set slightly left of center, a jawline that didn't quite match on both sides, eyes the color of creek water after a storm. "The hell, Griff?" "She's staying tonight." "Says who?" "Says me." Decker looked at Sarah, then back at Griff. Then at the door, like he expected someone else to walk through it and explain what was happening in terms that made more sense. "Where's her mother?" "That's what we need to figure out." The second man, Torque, the club's road captain, a wiry 50-year-old with a silver beard and hands that never stopped moving, set down the wrench he'd been holding and crossed his arms. He didn't say anything. He just watched, the way he always watched, cataloging information with the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent 22 years in military intelligence before trading desert sand for asphalt. The third man was Knox. He was standing in the doorway of the small office at the back of the garage, a room that served as armory, library, and bedroom depending on the hour. He had a mug of black coffee in his hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he was looking at Sarah with an expression that could have been concern or could have been calculation. With Knox, the difference was often impossible to determine. "Sarah," he said. Just the name. No inflection. No question mark. "Hey, Knox." "Sit down." She sat, not because she wanted to, but because Knox Barrett's voice had a specific gravity to it, a weight that made suggestions sound like geography, like the ground itself was shifting to accommodate his words. She took the folding chair next to Griff's workstation and pulled her knees up, the same way she'd been sitting in the van 3 hours ago when the world still made sense. Griff pulled Knox aside. Sarah could see them talking near the office door, Griff's hands moving as he spoke. Quick, precise gestures that mirrored the way he typed, like his body was an extension of whatever system he was running. Knox listened with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor. He didn't interrupt. He never interrupted. When Griff finished, Knox took a slow sip of his coffee and said something Sarah couldn't hear. 2 words, maybe 3. And Griff nodded and walked back to his monitors. "Decker," Knox said. "Yeah." "Call Harlan. Tell him to pull the outreach route records for the last 6 months. Every name Nora Mercer contacted, every address she visited. Tonight? Now." Decker stood up, tossing the dirty rag onto the workbench. He pulled out his phone and walked toward the roll-up door, stepping outside into the cold because Decker always made calls outside, even in December, even when his breath turned to fog before it left his mouth. Sarah didn't know why. She suspected it had something to do with the same reason he never sat with his back to a door. Torque moved to the kitchenette and poured a mug of coffee. He brought it to Sarah without asking if she wanted it, set it on the edge of Griff's desk, and went back to his seat. The coffee was terrible, scorched and bitter and at least 4 hours old, but the mug was warm in her hands and the steam rose in front of her face like a small curtain between her and everything else. "Griff," she said quietly. "Yeah?" "The name on the documents, Lydia Kessler. Can you find something?" Griff's fingers paused on the keyboard. He glanced at Knox, who was still standing near the office door, watching everything. "Kid, I need you to understand something. If I start looking into this, I'm going to find things. And once I find them, they don't go back in the box." "I know." "Do you? Because 13 is young enough to not know what you're asking for." "I'm sitting in a motorcycle garage at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday because my mother disappeared. I think the box is already open." Griff looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not pity, not admiration, something more complicated. The recognition of a kid who'd been forced to grow up faster than her bones could keep pace with. He started typing. The first hour produced nothing useful. Lydia Kessler was a common enough name that the search results were noise. Social media profiles, property records, obituaries for women in their 70s and 80s who had lived unremarkable lives in states Sarah had never visited. Griff narrowed the parameters, cross-referencing dates and locations, filtering for age ranges and known addresses that might overlap with Nora's timeline. Sarah watched. She didn't understand most of what she was seeing. The databases Griff was accessing didn't look like anything she'd encountered on the internet, and she suspected that at least some of them weren't supposed to be accessible to civilians or to anyone at all without specific credentials. "Griff?" Knox's voice from across the garage. "A word." Griff locked his screens and walked to the office. The door closed behind them. Through the frosted glass panel, Sarah could see their silhouettes, Knox standing still, Griff pacing the small space, his shadow moving back and forth like a metronome. They were in there for 12 minutes. Sarah counted. When the door opened, Griff's face had changed. The flat neutrality was gone, replaced by something tighter. A tension around his jaw and eyes that she associated with people who'd just received information they wished they hadn't. Knox walked past Sarah without speaking. He went to the roll-up door, pulled it open 3 feet, and stood there looking out at the parking lot where snow had started to fall. The cold air rushed in and mixed with the garage's warmth, creating a visible boundary where the two temperatures collided. A thin line of fog that hovered at chest height like a ghost, deciding whether to enter. "What did he tell you?" Sarah asked Griff when he sat back down. "Knox knows your mother." "Everyone knows my mother. She's been bringing donations here for 2 years. He knows her from before. Before Felton Ridge, before Sarah Mercer, before you." The words landed in Sarah's chest like stones dropped into still water. She felt the ripples spreading outward, disrupting the surface of everything she thought she understood about the arrangement between her mother and this garage, this club, these men. "How?" "He didn't say, and I didn't push. You learn fast around here. Knox tells you what he decides you need to know, and everything else stays locked behind that scar on his face. That's not good enough. Kid, no." Sarah's voice was harder than she intended, harder than she knew it could be. "My mother is gone. She has a fake identity in a bag that's also gone. Someone sent her a threat with a 48-hour deadline. And the man who runs this place apparently knew her in a previous life and never mentioned it. So no, he didn't say is not good enough." Griff leaned back in his chair. Torque, who hadn't moved from his seat across the garage, was watching Sarah with an expression that had shifted from neutral to something closer to respect. Or maybe wariness. With Torque, those two things lived so close together they might as well have shared an address. "She's not wrong," Torque said. First words he'd spoken all night. "Stay out of it," Griff said. "She's a kid sitting in our shop because her mother bolted. If Knox is holding cards, the kid deserves to see them. That's not your call. It's not yours either." The side door opened. Decker came back in, phone in his hand, snow dusting his shoulders. He looked at Griff, looked at Torque, read the tension in the room with the speed of a man who'd been reading rooms his entire adult life and had survived because of it. Harlan's pulling the records, he said. But he found something else. Nora Mercer's name pinged on a federal database 18 months ago. Sealed file. Witness protection. The garage went quiet, not the comfortable silence of men working side by side. The other kind. The silence that comes right before the first crack of thunder, when the air pressure changes and everything living goes still because it knows what's coming. Witness protection, Griff repeated. Sealed, which means she testified against someone, which means she's not Nora Mercer, which means she's Lydia Kessler, Sarah said. Every man in the garage looked at her. She stared back. Her hands were wrapped around the coffee mug so tightly her knuckles were white, but her voice was level and her eyes were dry and she didn't flinch. How long have you known that name? Decker asked. 2 years. I found her go bag in the closet. And you never told anyone? Who was I going to tell? Decker opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Knox, who had turned from the open door and was walking back into the garage with snowflakes melting in his short gray hair. His boots left wet prints on the concrete. His face was unreadable, but his hands were clenched at his sides in a way Sarah had never seen before, the tendons standing out like cables under the skin. Everybody out, Knox said. Nobody moved. I said out. Griff stays. Everyone else, give us the room. Decker looked like he wanted to argue. Torque was already standing, grabbing his jacket from the hook near the door. He touched Decker's arm on his way past. A brief contact, knuckle to elbow, the biker equivalent of don't push it, and Decker followed him out. The door closed. The garage was suddenly enormous. All that empty space between the workbenches and the bikes and the fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like trapped insects. Knox pulled a folding chair across the floor, the metal legs scraping on concrete, and sat down 3 feet from Sarah. Close enough to talk quietly, far enough that she didn't feel cornered. What I'm going to tell you, Knox said, I should have told you a long time ago. I should have told your mother I was going to tell you, and she would have told me to go to hell, and I would have done it anyway. I didn't. That's on me. Sarah waited. Your mother came to me 9 years ago. You were 4. She was running, not the way people run from bad relationships or bad debts, the way people run when the thing behind them will kill them if it catches up. She'd been in witness protection for 3 years, but the program had gaps. People fell through the cracks. She was one of them. How did she find you? She didn't find me. I found her. I was doing contract security work in Scranton, private firm, the kind that doesn't advertise. Her handler had been reassigned and she was exposed, no backup, living in a motel with a 4-year-old and $200 in cash. Someone I knew from the service flagged her situation. I drove up, brought her here, got her set up with the house on Birch Street. So the donations, Sarah said slowly. The outreach volunteering. That was cover. That was real. Your mother needed purpose. I needed someone to run the outreach logistics. But yes, part of the reason she's been coming here twice a week for 4 years is because this garage is the safest building in Felton Ridge, and she knew it. You lied to me. I withheld information that wasn't mine to share. That's lying. Knox didn't flinch. He held Sarah's stare with the steadiness of a man who'd been looked at with hatred and fear and everything in between and had decided a long time ago that none of it would break him. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. Griff's monitor pinged. He turned to look at it, and Sarah watched his face go pale beneath the blue glow of the screen. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had pulled a shade down behind his skin. Knox. What? The sealed file. Harlan cracked it. Griff's voice was careful now, each word placed with the precision of a man handling something explosive. Nora, Lydia, she testified against an identity smuggling operation. High level, international documents, passports, birth certificates. The kind of operation that moved people across borders who weren't supposed to be moved. Who ran it? Griff looked at Sarah, then back at Knox. Say it, Knox said. A man named Elliot Crane. He ran the operation out of the Northeast for 8 years. Nora was part of it. She was his document specialist. She built the identities. She was also... Griff paused, swallowed. She was also his partner, romantic partner. For 6 years. Sarah felt the room tilt. Not physically. The floor stayed level, the lights stayed on, gravity continued to function as advertised. But something inside her shifted, some internal architecture that had been holding the weight of her understanding of who she was and where she came from, and the shift made everything feel precarious. One more piece of information, and the whole structure might come down. When she testified against him, Griff continued, she was 7 months pregnant. The word hung in the air. Pregnant. 7 months. Sarah did the math without wanting to. The kind of calculation that happens automatically. The way your body flinches before your brain registers the threat. 13 years ago. 7 months pregnant. Testified against a man named Elliot Crane. "He's my father," Sarah said. She didn't ask it. She said it. A statement. A fact. A grenade thrown into the center of the room with the pin already gone. Knox looked at her. For the first time since she'd known him, she saw something behind his eyes that might have been pain. Not for himself, but for her, for the things she'd just understood and would never be able to ununderstand. "Yes," Knox said, "and the text message, tell her the truth. He sent it." "We don't know that yet." "But you think it." Knox didn't answer. His silence was its own confirmation. A gap in the armor he wore against the world, a place where the truth leaked through because even Knox Barrett couldn't hold everything back all the time. "Elliot Crane was sentenced to 15 years, Griff said, reading from the screen. "Convicted on 12 federal counts, he served 13 years with good behavior. He was released." Another pause, another swallow. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. That was the number that made everything snap into focus. The timeline that turned a vague sense of unease into a concrete geometric threat. 3 weeks out of prison. 3 weeks to plan. 3 weeks to find the woman who'd put him there and the daughter he'd never met. And now Nora was gone. The go-bag was gone. The 48 hours were ticking down. "Why didn't she come here?" Sarah asked. "If this is the safest building in Felton Ridge, why didn't she come here instead of running?" Knox and Griff exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second, but Sarah caught it. The flicker of something shared, something neither of them wanted to say out loud. "What?" she demanded. "Because your mother doesn't trust us anymore," Knox said. "Not completely. Not since last year." "What happened last year?" Knox stood up. He walked to his office and came back with a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, handled so many times the fold lines were soft as cloth. He handed it to Sarah. It was a letter, handwritten. The penmanship was neat but hurried, the kind of writing produced by someone who was trying to be careful but couldn't slow down. "Knox, I know about the Crane files. I know you've had them since the beginning. I know you've known who I am since before I walked through your door. I don't know why you kept them, and I don't know what you plan to do with them, but I know enough to understand that I can't trust someone who collects leverage on the people he claims to protect. I'll keep coming to the garage because Sarah is safe there, and the outreach work matters. But you and I are done. N." Sarah read the letter twice. The second time, she looked up at Knox with something new in her eyes. Not anger, not betrayal, something colder and more precise. Understanding. "You kept files on her. I keep files on everyone who comes through my door. That's how I protect this place." She saw it as a threat. She wasn't wrong to. "Then why are you helping now?" Knox took the letter back, folded it, put it in his back pocket with the same care another man might use to handle a photograph of someone he'd lost. "Because a 13-year-old girl is sitting in my garage asking me questions I should have answered years ago. Because her mother is running from a man who will find her whether she runs or not. And because I made a mistake, and the only thing worse than making a mistake is letting someone else pay for it." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but the side door slammed open and Decker came in with his phone pressed to his ear, his face locked in an expression she'd never seen on him before. Tight, urgent, every trace of sarcasm stripped away. "We've got a problem," Decker said. He lowered the phone. Harlan ran Elliot Crane's release records. He didn't go through standard parole processing. Someone expedited his release. Paperwork was flagged, signatures didn't match. And his last known address is a motel 14 miles from here. 14 miles. Sarah felt the distance collapse inside her chest. 14 miles was nothing. 14 miles was a 20-minute drive, a 40-minute walk, the distance between safety and annihilation compressed into a number that sounded like a suburb but felt like a knife. "He's been here the whole time," she whispered. "For at least 2 weeks," Decker confirmed. "Motel on Route 12, registered under a different name. Cash payment. No vehicle registered." Torque appeared in the doorway behind Decker, his silver beard frosted with snow, his eyes moving rapidly between the men in the room. He'd heard everything. Sarah could tell by the way his body was positioned, weight forward, hands loose at his sides, the posture of someone who'd already calculated the exits and the threats and the distance between them. "Knox," Torque said. "If Crane is 14 miles out and Nora's in the wind, he's not coming for Nora. Not first." The words settled over the room like ash after an explosion. Sarah saw Knox's jaw tighten, saw Griff push back from his desk, saw Decker's hand move to the phone that was still in his grip, fingers tightening around it as if it were a weapon. "He's coming for me," Sarah said. Nobody denied it. Nobody told her she was wrong. Nobody said the comforting things adults say to children when the truth is too sharp and too dangerous and too close. These men didn't deal in comfort. They dealt in reality, in hard facts and cold distances, and the understanding that the world was a place where a man could serve 13 years in prison and walk out the other side with nothing left inside him except the desire to hurt the people who'd taken everything away. Knox crossed the garage in 4 strides. He pulled the roll-up door down with a crash that shook the walls. He locked it. 2 deadbolts, a chain, the kind of security that didn't exist in hardware stores and had to be built by hand. "Nobody leaves," Knox said. "Nobody comes in. Griff, I want every camera on this property active in the next 5 minutes. Torquey, pull the bikes inside. Decker, call Harlan back and tell him to send everything he has on Crane. Movements, contacts, phone records, everything." The men moved. No arguments, no questions. The shift happened with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd done this before. Not this exactly, but something close enough that the muscle memory applied. Within minutes, the garage transformed from a workshop into something else entirely. Something harder. Something that hummed with a frequency Sarah recognized from movies, but had never felt in her actual body. The vibration of a place that was preparing for a fight. Sarah sat in her folding chair and watched them work. Her coffee had gone cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Snow tapped against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. Her phone was in her lap. She looked at the screen. Still no calls, no messages from Nora. Just the default wallpaper. The mountain range she'd never visited. She thought about Elliot Crane, her father. A man she'd never met, whose face she'd never seen, whose voice she'd never heard. A man who'd spent 13 years in a cell because her mother had chosen her over him. A man who was, at this moment, 14 miles away in a motel room, doing something, planning something, and the only thing standing between him and whatever he wanted was a cinder-block building full of wounded men in leather who'd never asked to be anyone's protectors, but had become them anyway, because that's what happened when the world failed people. Someone had to catch them. Someone always had to catch them. Griff's monitor pinged again. He looked at the screen. His fingers stopped moving. "Knox? What now?" "Nora's phone just came online. GPS, ping. She's not running." "Where is she?" Griff turned the monitor so Knox could see it. Sarah leaned forward, reading the map over Griff's shoulder. The colored pins, the tracking grid, the single blue dot pulsing on the screen like a heartbeat in a body she couldn't see. "She's at the motel on Route 12, Griff said. "Same location as Crane." The room stopped. Every man froze in place. Decker with a chain in his hands, Torque halfway through wheeling a Harley across the floor, Knox standing rigid with his fists clenched so tightly the scars on his knuckles turned white. Sarah stared at the blue dot on the screen. Her mother. At the motel. With the man she'd spent 13 years hiding from. The man she'd betrayed. The man who was Sarah's father. Nora hadn't run away. She'd run toward him. And Sarah understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water pouring through her veins, that her mother had gone to Elliot Crane not to fight and not to hide, but to offer herself, her presence, her surrender, whatever he wanted, in exchange for the only thing Nora Mercer had ever truly cared about protecting, her daughter. Knox was already reaching for his jacket, his keys, the helmet he kept on a hook near the door that Sarah had never once seen him wear. "Everyone rides," Knox said. "Now." But Sarah was already on her feet, her cold coffee spilling across Griff's desk, her voice cutting through the garage with a force that made every man in the room turn to look at her. This 13-year-old girl with her mother's jaw and her father's eyes, standing in a motorcycle shop at midnight with snow falling outside and the truth finally, irrevocably, catastrophically loose. "I'm coming with you," she said. And Knox Barrett, the man who spoke 30 words on a good day and never explained his decisions to anyone, looked at this child who had just learned that everything she'd ever known was a lie. Looked at her the way a man looks at a fire he knows he can't put out but refuses to walk away from, and said the two words that changed everything. "Get on." They rode without headlights for the first 2 miles. Knox led the formation, 4 Harleys in a staggered line cutting through the snow-dusted backroads east of Felton Ridge, engines throttled low, exhaust trailing behind them like breath from something ancient and restless. Sarah sat behind Griff on the second bike, her arms locked around his midsection, her face pressed against the back of his canvas jacket. The cold was immediate and absolute. It found every gap in her clothing, every exposed inch of skin, and it stayed there like a judgment. She couldn't feel her fingers after the first mile. She didn't care. The road to Route 12 ran through a stretch of unincorporated land that the county had stopped maintaining 3 winters ago. Cracked asphalt, no streetlights. Guardrails rusted through and leaning at angles that suggested they'd stop nothing heavier than a strong wind. The trees pressed in from both sides, bare branches reaching overhead like the ribcage of something enormous that had died and refused to decompose. Knox raised his left fist. The formation slowed. They pulled off the road onto a gravel shoulder 1/2 mile from the motel, killing their engines one by one until the only sound was the tick of cooling metal and the wind moving through the trees with a low, sustained moan that sounded like a warning. "Decker, Torque, west side, service road behind the building. Stay off the lot until I signal." Knox's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the way certain sounds carry in cold air. Clean, sharp, impossible to miss. "Griff, you and the kids stay here." "No," Sarah said. Knox didn't look at her. He was scanning the tree line, reading the darkness with the practiced patience of a man who'd spent years in places where darkness was the thing that killed you. "That wasn't a request." "She's my mother." "And she went there to keep you away from him. You showing up is the one thing she's trying to prevent." "Then why did you bring me?" Knox turned. In the faint moonlight that filtered through the cloud cover, his scar looked deeper than usual. A canyon carved into the left side of his face, the topography of a wound that had healed wrong and stayed wrong as a permanent reminder of whatever had caused it. "Because you deserve to be close enough to know, not close enough to be in the room." He walked to his bike, swung his leg over, kicked the engine to life with a single, practiced motion that made the Harley growl like an animal woken from sleep. Decker and Torque followed, their bikes rumbling to life in sequence, and the 3 of them rolled off the gravel shoulder and onto the road, heading toward the pale glow of the motel sign visible through the trees. A vertical column of neon that read Pine Ridge Motor Lodge, in letters that flickered between orange and dead. Sarah watched them go. Then she turned to Griff. "You're not going to keep me here. Kid, give me your phone." Griff studied her face in the darkness. Whatever he saw there, the set of her jaw, the flatness in her eyes, the particular kind of stubbornness that comes from being lied to by every adult you've ever trusted, it made him reach into his jacket and hand over the phone without another word. Sarah pulled up the GPS tracker. The blue dot was still pulsing at the motel. Her mother's phone, still active, still broadcasting its location from somewhere inside the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge. She zoomed in. The dot was stationary, positioned in what appeared to be a room on the ground floor, east side of the building. "Room 14, Griff said, reading over her shoulder. "If the layout is standard, that's a corner unit. 1 window facing the parking lot, 1 facing the back. Single entry." "How do you know the layout?" "I pulled the building plans from county records while we were riding. Sent them to Knox's phone." Sarah looked at him. "You did that while driving a motorcycle?" "I'm good at multitasking." She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. None of this was funny, but the absurdity of it pressed against the terror and created something that felt like laughter, even if it never reached her throat. A sound reached them from the direction of the motel. Not engines, not voices. Something else. A sharp, percussive crack that could have been a door slamming or a branch breaking under the weight of ice, or something worse. Something Sarah didn't want to name. Griff's hand closed on her arm, firm, not painful, the grip of someone who'd made a decision. "Stay behind me. Don't talk. Don't run. If I tell you to get on the ground, you get on the ground." "Okay." "I mean it, Sarah. I said okay." They moved through the trees on foot, leaving the bike on the shoulder. The snow was thin, but the ground beneath it was frozen solid, and every step produced a sound. Crunch, crack, snap, that made Sarah feel like they were walking through a minefield of noise. Griff moved differently than she did. He placed his boots with a deliberateness that minimized sound, shifting his weight gradually, using the wind to mask what footfall he couldn't eliminate. Military training. Or something adjacent to military training, something she hadn't known about him, and was only now seeing because the circumstances had stripped away the surface layer of who he was and exposed the machinery underneath. The motel materialized through the trees like a photograph developing in chemicals. 2 stories, L-shaped, 24 rooms arranged around a parking lot that had been plowed badly and then abandoned to the elements. A single mercury vapor light illuminated the front office, which was dark and locked. No night clerk, no vacancy sign, nothing that suggested anyone was supposed to be conducting business here at 1 in the morning. 4 vehicles in the lot. Nora's van was parked near the east wing, its engine cold, snow accumulating on the windshield. Knox's Harley was parked at the far end of the lot, along with Decker's and Torque's. Empty. The men were already inside the building or around it. Sarah couldn't tell which, and the not knowing made her stomach clench. Griff stopped at the edge of the tree line and crouched. He pulled Sarah down beside him. "Room 14, he whispered, pointing. "Corner unit. Lights on." She could see it. A thin band of yellow leaking through curtains that didn't quite close. The window was fogged from the inside, which meant heat, which meant someone was in there, which meant her mother was 30 yards away in a motel room with a man who had spent 13 years planning what he'd do when he got out. A shadow moved behind the curtain. Then another. 2 figures, both standing, no visible struggle, no sounds of distress, just 2 silhouettes in a lit room having what appeared to be a conversation. The door to room 14 opened. Knox stepped out. He didn't look left or right. He walked straight to the railing at the edge of the walkway and gripped it with both hands, his head down, his shoulders rising and falling with breaths that were too deep and too controlled, the breathing of a man managing something inside himself that wanted to get out. Decker emerged behind him. Then Torque. They flanked Knox on either side, standing close but not touching him, a formation that looked protective but might have been containment. Torque said something Sarah couldn't hear. Knox shook his head once. Then Nora appeared in the doorway. She looked small. That was the first thing Sarah registered. Her mother looked physically smaller than she had 6 hours ago, as if the conversation she'd just had in that room had compressed her, removed something structural from inside her body, and left her diminished. Her coat was hanging open. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was a mask of exhaustion so complete it looked like a medical condition. Behind Nora, still inside the room, a man sat on the edge of the bed. Sarah couldn't see him clearly, just a shape in the yellow light, lean, still, watching the doorway with the patience of someone who'd learned to wait in a place where waiting was the only available activity. His hands were on his knees. He wasn't restrained. He wasn't threatened. He was just sitting there, as if the 4 bikers who'd just walked out of his room were guests who'd overstayed their welcome. Elliot Crane. Her father. A shape in a motel room. A stranger with her blood. Griff's phone buzzed. A text from Knox. "Bring the kid." Griff showed her the screen. "You sure?" "No." "Good. People who are sure about things like this are usually wrong." They crossed the parking lot. Sarah's boots on the asphalt sounded impossibly loud, each step a declaration of presence, an announcement that she was here and moving toward the thing she was most afraid of and couldn't stop moving toward because stopping would mean choosing not to know. And she'd spent 13 years not knowing, and the weight of it was greater than the fear. Nora saw her first. The reaction was immediate, a full-body flinch that started in her shoulders and traveled down through her arms and into her hands, which came up as if to block something. Not a blow. Something worse. The sight of her daughter walking toward the room where her father was sitting on a bed in a motel that smelled like mildew and old smoke, and the particular staleness of spaces that have been occupied by desperation. No. Nora's voice was raw, stripped. No, Knox, you did not bring her here. She was coming regardless. She's 13, and she already knows. She knows about Lydia Kessler. She knows about witness protection. She knows about Crane. Nora's face collapsed. Not slowly. It happened all at once, like a building coming down, every wall falling inward simultaneously. She looked at Sarah with an expression that contained every emotion a human face could hold and none of the ability to process them. Baby, don't. Sarah's voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment in her head for the last 3 hours and had decided that the only way to survive it was to not feel it. Not yet. Later. Don't baby me. Not now. I was trying to protect you. By going to him? By keeping him away from you. How? By giving him what he wants? Nora's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind her in the room, the shape on the bed shifted, leaned forward. A face moved into the light from the doorway. Thin, angular, clean-shaven, with eyes that were the exact shade of gray-green that Sarah saw every morning in the bathroom mirror. A face that looked like hers in the way that photocopies look like originals. Similar enough to be unmistakable, different enough to be its own thing. Elliot Crane looked at his daughter for the first time in his life. "Hello, Sarah," he said. His voice was calm, not warm, not cold. The carefully modulated tone of a man who'd had 13 years to practice what he'd say in this moment and had decided that simplicity was the most effective weapon. 2 words. A greeting. As if they were meeting at a parent-teacher conference instead of a motel room at 1 a.m. in a town he'd come to for the specific purpose of detonating the life she'd built in his absence. Sarah didn't respond. She stood on the walkway between Knox and Decker, looking at this man who was half of her biology and none of her history, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not fear, curiosity. The sharp, dangerous curiosity of a person who has just discovered that a piece of herself has been living in someone else's body for 13 years. "You're smaller than I imagined," Crane said. "You didn't imagine me," Sarah said. "You don't get to imagine me." Something flickered across Crane's face, surprise maybe, or something adjacent to it. The expression of a man who'd prepared for tears and pleas and the predictable emotional responses of a child, and had instead encountered something harder. Something with edges. "She's got your spine, Lydia," Crane said, looking past Sarah to Nora. "Whatever else you did to her, you didn't take that away." "Don't talk to her," Knox said. His voice was the lowest Sarah had ever heard it. Subterranean. A frequency that you felt in your chest more than you heard in your ears. "Don't look at her. You talk to me." "And who are you? The new protector?" Crane's eyes moved to Knox's cut. The Iron Haven patch, the anvil and chain. "You've got a garage full of broken soldiers playing outlaw, and you think that makes you qualified to raise someone else's child? Nobody's raising her. She's not yours to raise and she's not mine. We're having a different conversation." "Are we? Because from where I sit, you brought a 13-year-old girl to a motel in the middle of the night to confront a man she's never met. That's not protection. That's theater." Knox took a step toward the doorway. Decker's hand came up and pressed flat against Knox's chest. Not pushing, just existing. A physical boundary that said not yet, not here, not with the kid watching. Knox stopped. His jaw worked. The scar on his face pulsed with the rhythm of his heartbeat, pink and alive against the weathered brown of his skin. "Here's what's going to happen," Knox said. "You're going to tell me what you want. You're going to tell me why you're 14 miles from my garage. And then you're going to get in a vehicle and leave this county before sunrise." "Or what?" "Or I'm going to make you wish you'd stayed in prison." Crane stood up. He was taller than Sarah expected. 6'1", maybe 6'2", and he moved with a deliberateness that reminded her of Knox, though the similarity made her stomach turn. Two men who occupied space the same way. Two men who spoke only when the words mattered. Two men who had been circling her mother for years without Sarah knowing either of them existed. "I don't want money," Crane said. "I don't want revenge. I don't want Lydia back." "Then what?" "I want the files." The word landed in the space between them like a dropped blade. Files. Sarah saw Knox's body change, a subtle shift in his weight, a tightening across his upper back. The micro-adjustments of a man who'd just heard something he'd been afraid of hearing. "What files?" Griff asked from behind Sarah. "He knows." Crane was looking at Knox. Only at Knox. "The files your president has been keeping in that office of his for 9 years. The ones he pulled from Lydia's protection records. The ones that contain every identity she ever built for my operation. Names, documents, photographs. 237 people who crossed borders using papers she created." Sarah turned to Knox. "The files Mom wrote you about, the ones in the letter." Knox said nothing. "She told you about the letter?" Crane's eyebrows rose. "Interesting. Then she told you that your protector has been sitting on enough information to destroy not just me, not just Lydia, but every single person who used those identities to disappear. Witnesses. Victims. People running from governments and cartels and situations you can't imagine. 237 names, and your biker hero has them locked in a filing cabinet next to his spare ammunition." Sarah felt the ground shift again. Not the physical ground, so the other ground. The one made of trust and understanding and the belief that the people protecting you were doing it for the right reasons. She looked at Knox and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not shame. Something quieter and more corrosive. The expression of a man who'd been carrying something he shouldn't have carried, keeping something he shouldn't have kept, and had known the entire time that the day of reckoning was coming. "Knox," Decker's voice was different now. The loyalty was still there, but it was strained. A rope-bearing weight it hadn't been tested for. "Tell me he's lying." Knox didn't tell him he was lying. "The files exist," Knox said. "I pulled them from the federal database when Nora first came to me. I kept them as insurance. If Crane ever got out, if the operation ever resurfaced, if anyone came looking for Nora, I needed leverage." "Leverage against who?" Torque asked. His voice was blade-thin. "Against Crane? Or against Nora?" "Both. Either. Whoever became the threat." "You kept files on the people she helped escape," Sarah said slowly, understanding spreading through her like cold water. "Witnesses, victims, people who needed new identities to survive. And you kept their names in a cabinet in your garage." "I kept them to protect you." "You kept them to control the situation. There's a difference." Knox flinched. It was small, a tremor that passed through his left hand and disappeared as quickly as it came. But Sarah saw it, and she knew that in the language of Knox Barrett's body, that flinch was the equivalent of another man screaming. Nora moved. She stepped between Knox and the doorway where Crane was standing, positioning herself in the center of the walkway, with her arms at her sides and her chin raised and a look on her face that Sarah had never seen. Not defiance, not surrender, something between them. The expression of a woman who'd spent 13 years running and had finally stopped, not because she'd found safety, but because she'd run out of road. "Elliot," Nora said, "if I give you the files, you leave. You leave Felton Ridge, you leave Sarah. You disappear, and you don't come back." "Mom." "Sarah, be quiet. You can't give him—" "I said be quiet." The sharpness in Nora's voice cut through the night air like a blade through paper. Sarah felt it in her chest, the sting of being silenced by the person who was supposed to listen, the particular hurt of a mother choosing strategy over connection in the moment her daughter needed her most. Crane watched the exchange with an expression that Sarah recognized from her own face, the look of someone cataloging information, storing it, understanding that every word spoken was also a weapon and that the most dangerous weapons were the ones wrapped in love. "The files," Crane said, "and one conversation with my daughter, alone. 30 minutes. "Absolutely not," Knox said. "I wasn't asking you." "You're not getting 30 seconds alone with her. Not in this room, not in this town, not in this lifetime." Crane smiled. It was the worst thing Sarah had seen all night. A smile that contained no warmth, no humor, no human connection. A smile that was a tool designed and deployed with the precision of someone who'd spent 8 years running an operation built on deception. Then I released the names myself, Crane said. All 237. I have copies. Did you think I wouldn't? I've had 13 years to plan this, Knox. 13 years in a cell with nothing to do but memorize every name, every document, every border crossing your girlfriend facilitated. I release those names, and every person Lydia helped disappear gets found. Witnesses get located by the people they testified against. Abuse survivors get found by the people they fled. Children get found by the parents they were hidden from. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before. This was silence with mass, silence with gravity, the kind of silence that bends the space around it and makes everything nearby heavier. 237 people, Crane repeated. That's the number. That's the weight of what your protector has been sitting on. And the only thing standing between those people and the worst day of their lives is whether or not I get 30 minutes with my daughter. Sarah looked at Knox, at Griff, at Decker, and Torque. She looked at her mother, who was staring at the concrete walkway with the expression of someone watching a building collapse from the inside. She looked at Elliot Crane, who was watching her with those gray-green eyes, her eyes, and waiting. This isn't about the files, Sarah said. Everyone looked at her. This was never about the files. You had copies the whole time. You could have released those names from prison. You could have sent them to a journalist, posted them online, mailed them to every agency in the country. But you didn't. You waited. You got out. You came here. You sent Mom a text message with a 48-hour deadline. You wanted this, all of us, standing here, in this parking lot, in the middle of the night. You wanted me to see this. Crane's smile changed. The artifice drained out of it, and what remained was something Sarah couldn't name. Something that lived in the space between admiration and hunger. You wanted me to see that Mom ran, Sarah continued. You wanted me to see that Knox kept files he shouldn't have kept. You wanted me to see that every person who was supposed to protect me had their own reasons, their own leverage, their own secrets. You wanted me to stand here and look at all of them and see what you see, that nobody is who they say they are. And do you? Crane asked. Do you see it? Sarah stared at him. The parking lot was silent, except for the wind and the distant sound of a truck engine somewhere on Route 12 and the tick of snow hitting the metal railing of the motel walkway. I see it, she said, but seeing it doesn't make you right. And it doesn't make you my father. Crane's face went still. Whatever he'd expected, collapse, tears, alliance, this wasn't it. This 13-year-old girl standing in a frozen parking lot had done the thing he hadn't calculated for. She'd seen the truth and refused to let it destroy her. She'd looked at the wreckage of every relationship in her life and chosen to remain standing. 30 minutes, Crane said again. But the certainty was gone from his voice. The edge had dulled. No, Sarah said. You don't get 30 minutes. You don't get 30 seconds. What you get is this. Me, standing here, telling you that I know who you are, and I know what you did, and I know that half my blood comes from a man who would use 237 innocent people as a bargaining chip to get an audience with a kid he's never bothered to know. That's what you get. That's all you get. She turned to Knox. Take me back to the garage. Knox looked at her. For one long, suspended moment, the two of them existed in a space outside the motel, outside the standoff, outside the entire catastrophic architecture of lies and leverage, and 13 years of damage. He looked at her the way you look at someone who has just done something you don't fully understand, but recognize as important, as necessary, as the kind of thing that changes the shape of everything that comes after. He nodded. Griff, Knox said, take her back. Knox, Nora started. You stay, Knox said to Nora. His voice was iron wrapped in gravel. You and I are going to finish this conversation, and then we're going to walk into that room and get those files. And then we're going to figure out how to keep 237 people alive when the man who wants to destroy them is standing 12 feet away and smiling. Griff put his hand on Sarah's shoulder, light, brief, the touch of someone guiding rather than controlling. They walked across the parking lot toward the tree line. Behind them, Sarah heard Crane's voice, flat, stripped, carrying across the frozen air with the clarity of a bell struck in an empty room. "She'll come back," Crane said. "They always come back." Sarah didn't turn around. She kept walking. Her boots on the asphalt, then gravel, then frozen dirt, then the crunch of snow between the trees. Griff's bike was where they'd left it. He handed her the helmet he never wore. She put it on. The engine started. The vibration traveled through her body the way it always did. From the frame up through her legs and into her spine and all the way to the base of her skull, where it settled like a second heartbeat. They pulled onto the road. The motel disappeared behind the trees. Sarah pressed her face against Griff's back and closed her eyes. The wind cut through her clothes. The cold was a living thing, wrapping around her with the intimacy of something that knew her body's exact measurements and was filling every gap with ice. She thought about 237 names she didn't know. People she'd never met, living in cities she'd never visited, hiding behind identities her mother had built for them with hands that were now shaking in a motel parking lot in December. 237 lives balanced on the decisions being made right now, behind her, in a place she couldn't see. She thought about Knox and his files, about the leverage he'd kept, about the difference between protection and control, and how, from the outside, the two could look identical. The same locked doors, the same withheld information, the same voice saying, "I'm doing this for your own good," while the walls closed in. She thought about Elliot Crane and the smile that had no warmth in it, and the eyes that looked like hers, and the voice that had said she'll come back with the confidence of a man who believed that blood was a leash and that 13 years of absence was a debt that the universe would eventually collect. And she thought about what she'd done. Standing in that parking lot, looking at every lie, choosing to remain standing. It wasn't enough. She knew that. Remaining standing was a moment, not a solution. Crane still had his copies. Knox still had his files. Her mother was still in that parking lot, negotiating with a man who had turned 237 lives into currency. The 48 hours were still ticking, and Sarah had just walked away from the only conversation that might have stopped the clock. But she'd made a choice, and in making it, she'd done something that none of the adults in her life had managed to do. She'd refused to trade one person's safety for another's. She'd refused to play the game by rules that turned human beings into leverage. The question was whether that refusal would be enough to save anyone. The garage appeared through the snow. Griff pulled in, killed the engine. The roll-up door was down. The deadbolts were locked. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. The fluorescent lights, the workbenches, the cold coffee, the monitors still glowing with maps and data that now felt like the blueprints of a disaster. Sarah pulled off the helmet. Her hair was damp with sweat and snowmelt. Her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, she realized. From everything else. Griff unlocked the side door. They stepped inside. The warmth hit her like a wave, and with it came the smell. Oil and metal and burnt coffee and leather, the permanent olfactory signature of Iron Haven Garage. The closest thing she had to a home that wasn't built on lies. She sat in her folding chair. She pulled her knees up. She stared at Griff's monitors and watched the blue dot that was her mother's phone, still pulsing at the motel, still stationary, still broadcasting its location like a heart that refused to stop beating even when the body around it was falling apart. Her own phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "You're just like her, but you're also just like me. You'll understand that soon enough." Sarah stared at the message. 6 words from her mother 3 hours ago had started this. Now 6 words from her father were trying to finish it. She set the phone face down on the desk. She looked at Griff, who was watching her with an expression that held something she'd never seen from any adult in her life. Not pity, not protectiveness, not the performative concern of someone who wanted to be seen caring. Something simpler, something rarer. Respect. "He's not going to stop," Sarah said. "No," Griff agreed. "He's not." And Knox's files, the 237 names, even if we get them back, Crane has copies. Destroying the originals doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. So what does? Griff sat down. He cracked his knuckles one at a time, a habit she'd noticed weeks ago and now recognized as his version of thinking, the physical manifestation of a mind cycling through possibilities the way his fingers cycled through code. "The only thing that fixes this," he said slowly, is making the copies worthless, discrediting them, proving they're fabricated or corrupted or compromised in a way that makes them inadmissible, unpublishable, unusable. Can you do that? Maybe. If I had the originals to work from, if I had time, if I had someone who understood the documents well enough to know which details to alter and which to leave intact. Someone like my mother. Someone exactly like your mother. Sarah looked at the blue dot on the screen. Her mother. The woman who'd built 237 identities with enough skill to fool federal agencies. The woman who'd spent 13 years hiding from the man she'd betrayed. The woman who was, at this moment, standing in a motel parking lot with bikers and a criminal and the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down on her shoulders. The woman who would have to come back to this garage and sit down at this desk and use the same skills that had destroyed her life to save 237 people she'd never see again. If she came back at all. Sarah picked up her phone, turned it over, read Crane's message one more time. You're just like her, but you're also just like me. She typed 3 words and hit send. Come home, Mom. Then she set the phone down and waited in the yellow light of a garage that smelled like engines and cold leather, surrounded by the tools and machines and silent spaces of men who fixed broken things for a living, hoping that the one broken thing that mattered most could still be fixed, and knowing, with the terrible clarity of a child who has seen too much too fast, that the answer might already be no. Nora came back at 3:47 a.m. Sarah heard the van before she saw it. The engine laboring up the gravel drive, tires slipping on ice, headlights sweeping across the garage windows in a slow arc that painted the ceiling with moving shadows. She was sitting in the same folding chair, in the same position, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her shins. She hadn't moved in 2 hours. The coffee on Griff's desk had gone cold, then room temperature, then something below room temperature that wasn't quite cold again, but existed in a dead zone between states. Griff looked up from his monitors. He'd been working the entire time, silent, relentless, his fingers moving across the keyboard with a velocity that made the typing sound like rainfall on a tin roof. 3 monitors blazing with data, spreadsheets, document templates, file structures that Sarah didn't understand but could feel the weight of. 237 names. 237 lives sitting inside Griff's machines, waiting to be saved or destroyed depending on what happened in the next 24 hours. The side door opened. Nora stood in the frame with snow in her hair and mascara tracks on her cheeks, and the black duffel bag hanging from her right hand like an anchor she'd been dragging across the ocean floor. She looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back. Neither of them spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A space heater clicked on in the corner, its coils glowing orange. The smell of the garage, oil, metal, leather, exhaustion, hung between them like a curtain that neither of them had the strength to push through. I got your text, Nora said. I know. I came back. I can see that. Nora set the duffel bag on the floor. She walked to the kitchenette, poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting on the burner for 6 hours, and drank it without testing the temperature. Her throat worked. Her hands were steady now. Not the shaking hands from 6 hours ago, but steady in the way that things are steady after they break. The stillness of exhaustion so complete that even trembling required more energy than the body had left to give. Where's Knox? Sarah asked. Still at the motel. He and Crane are talking. Negotiating. Knox is trying to buy time. Crane gave us 72 hours instead of 48. That's generous of him. The sarcasm in Sarah's voice was new. She could feel it, a sharp edge that hadn't been there before tonight, growing from a place inside her chest where trust used to live. She didn't like it. It felt like putting on someone else's clothes. But the alternative was softness, and softness right now would kill her. Nora sat down on the floor, not on a chair, not on a crate. On the concrete floor with her back against the wall and her legs stretched out in front of her and her coat still on. She looked up at her daughter from below. An inversion of every conversation they'd ever had, every bedtime, every argument across a kitchen table. The mother looking up, the daughter looking down. Ask me, Nora said. Ask you what? Whatever you need to ask. Everything. All of it. No more secrets. Sarah studied her mother's face. The mascara tracks had dried into dark lines that ran from her lower lashes to her jawline, like cracks in porcelain. Her lips were chapped. Her eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with red, and so tired they looked like they belonged to someone 20 years older. "Did you love him?" Nora closed her eyes. "Yes. When you were building identities for his operation, when you were helping people cross borders, did you know what you were doing was illegal?" "Yes." "Did you care?" "I told myself I was helping people. Some of them, many of them, were running from real danger, abuse, persecution, situations where disappearing was the only option. Elliot gave me the tools to help them, and I needed to believe, that the work was good even if the methods weren't." "And when did you stop believing?" Nora opened her eyes. "When I got pregnant with you." The words landed in the space between them with the precision of a surgical instrument, cutting exactly where they needed to cut, exposing exactly what needed to be exposed. Sarah felt them enter her body and settle somewhere between her sternum and her spine, in the place where the things you can't unfeel go to live permanently. "He didn't want me," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "He wanted to control what you became. He wanted to raise you inside the operation. He wanted you to be the next generation of what he'd built. I couldn't—" Nora's voice cracked, a single fracture in the controlled surface, and through it leaked something raw and wet and desperate. "I couldn't let him turn you into a tool." "So you testified against him." "I made a deal with federal prosecutors, full testimony in exchange for witness protection for me and my unborn child. They gave us new names, new city, new life, and for 13 years, it worked. Until 3 weeks ago. Until 3 weeks ago." Griff's chair creaked. He turned from his monitors and looked at Nora with an expression that was pure calculation. No emotion, no judgment, just the focused assessment of a man solving a problem. "The documents you built for Crane's operation," he said. "How sophisticated were they? Federal level, passports, birth certificates, driver's licenses, social security cards, layered identities with backstopped histories, credit records, employment records, medical records, everything you'd need to become someone else completely. And Crane has copies of all 237 files?" "He says he does. He memorized the names in prison and reconstructed the documents from memory. How complete they are?" "I don't know. But even partial information is enough to find most of those people." "Could you rebuild the files? Create new versions, altered versions, that would discredit his copies?" Nora looked at Griff, then at Sarah, then at the monitors glowing behind him with the data that represented 237 human beings whose safety depended on the next 72 hours. "Yes," Nora said, "but I'd need the originals, the ones Knox has." "Knox is at the motel. Then someone needs to get into his office." Sarah stood up. "I know the combination." Both adults turned to look at her. "The filing cabinet in Knox's office, 4-digit combination lock. He changed it 3 months ago. I watched him do it from across the garage. 7241. Griff stared at her. "You memorized Knox Barrett's lock combination?" "I memorize everything. It's not a skill, it's a problem. But right now it's useful." Griff looked at Nora. Nora looked at Griff. Between them passed the unspoken acknowledgement that this 13-year-old girl had just done something that none of the adults around her had managed. She'd been paying attention. While the grown-ups were keeping secrets and maintaining leverage and negotiating with criminals, Sarah had been watching, cataloging, storing information the way Griff stored data, the way Knox stored files, the way Nora stored identities. The daughter of a master forger and a criminal architect, raised by a brotherhood of wounded soldiers, had inherited every tool she needed to survive this moment. She just hadn't known it until now. Knox's office was an 8x10 room at the back of the garage, separated from the main space by a door with frosted glass and a deadbolt that Griff picked in under 30 seconds, using a tension wrench and a rake from his toolkit. Inside, the room smelled like leather and gun oil, and the particular staleness of a space that was occupied but never aired out. A cot against one wall, blankets folded with military precision. A bookshelf with manuals and maps and 3 framed photographs turned face down. A desk covered in papers and ammunition boxes, and a coffee mug with a crack running down one side that Knox had never bothered to replace. The filing cabinet was in the corner, gray steel, 4 drawers. The combination lock hung from the top drawer's hasp, a heavy-duty master lock with a dial that Sarah spun with the confidence of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment inside her head without knowing she was rehearsing it. 7, 2, 4, 1. The lock opened. The drawer slid out on rollers that squealed from disuse. Inside, hanging files in green folders, each one labeled with a handwritten code, alphanumeric sequences that meant nothing to Sarah but clearly meant something to Knox, because they were organized with a precision that bordered on obsessive. "Second row," Nora said from behind her. She was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face tight with an expression that Sarah recognized as the specific anguish of a person watching someone else handle the most dangerous thing in the room. Look for files marked LC series. Those are the identity packages. Sarah found them. LC-001 through LC-237. Each folder contained a sheaf of documents, photocopied passports, forged birth certificates, identity histories typed on a manual typewriter, photographs of people Sarah had never seen. Faces of strangers, men, women, children, people who existed somewhere in the world right now under names that Nora had given them, living lives that Nora had constructed, breathing air in cities Nora had chosen for them. 237 ghosts, made real by a woman who was now standing in a motorcycle garage in December, watching her 13-year-old daughter pull their futures out of a filing cabinet. "Take all of them," Nora said. "Every file." They carried the folders to Griff's workstation. Nora sat down at the spare monitor, the one that was usually dark, and Griff logged her in with a temporary profile. Her hands moved across the keyboard with a fluidity that Sarah had never seen from her mother, not ever, a speed and certainty that belonged to a different person. To Lydia Kessler, to the woman who'd built 237 identities with enough skill to fool the federal government. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "Poisoning the well. Every identity Crane memorized. I'm creating variant files with altered details. Different dates, different social security numbers, different photographs. When I'm done, there will be 3 versions of every identity: Knox's originals, Crane's reconstructions, and my corrupted copies. Nobody will be able to tell which is real. The originals become worthless because they can't be verified. Crane's copies become worthless because they can't be distinguished from my fakes. The whole dataset becomes noise. And the real people? Stay hidden. Because even if Crane releases everything he has, anyone trying to use that information will find 3 conflicting sets of records. It'll look like fabrication, like disinformation, like someone manufactured the entire archive to cause chaos. Because someone did, Sarah said. You. Nora's fingers paused on the keyboard. She turned and looked at her daughter, and for the first time since she'd walked back through the garage door, something cracked in her expression that wasn't pain or guilt or exhaustion. It was something closer to recognition. The look a parent gets when they see their child do something that reveals, for the first time, the adult that child is going to become. "Yeah," Nora said. "Me." She turned back to the screen and started working. The hours collapsed. Time inside Ironhaven Garage became a thing measured not by clocks but by the rate of Nora's typing, the rhythm of Griff's commands, the slow accumulation of corrupted files stacking up in a directory that grew like a tumor on his hard drive. Sarah sat beside them and watched. She didn't understand the technical details, the encryption layers, the metadata manipulation, the careful alteration of details that had to be different enough to create confusion but similar enough to be plausible. But she understood the architecture, the shape of what they were building, a wall of noise designed to protect silence. Decker and Torque came back at 5:30 in the morning. They entered through the side door smelling like cold air and cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of adrenaline that hadn't fully metabolized. Decker had a bruise forming beneath his left eye, a crescent of purple that hadn't been there when he left. He didn't explain it, and nobody asked. "Knox is still with Crane," Decker said. "They've been in that room for 4 hours, just talking. I've never seen Knox talk for 4 hours about anything." "What are they talking about?" Griff asked without looking up from his screen. "I don't know. Torque was on the west side. I was watching the lot. Knox told us to stay out, but the temperature in that room it's not good. Crane isn't scared, That's what bothers me. He should be scared. He's in a motel room with Knox Barrett, and he's not even slightly scared. He's not scared because he thinks he's already won, Sarah said. Every man in the room looked at her. He thinks the files are his leverage. He thinks the 72-hour deadline gives him control, but he doesn't know what Mom's doing right now. He doesn't know we have the originals. He thinks the only play is his play. Kid's right, Torque said. He'd been standing near the door with his arms crossed, silver beard catching the fluorescent light, eyes moving between the monitors and the faces of the people watching them. Crane's operating on 13-year-old intelligence. He doesn't know this club. He doesn't know what Griff can do. He doesn't know what Nora can do when she's not running. He knows enough, Decker countered. He knows where we are. He knows Sarah exists. He knows the files exist. And in 72 hours, 68 now, he's going to release whatever he has, and no matter how much noise Nora builds, some of those names will be real. Some of those people will be found. Not if we discredit him first, Griff said. Silence. The kind that comes before someone says something that changes the shape of everything. Explain, Decker said. Nora's building corrupted copies. That protects the identities long term. But short term, we need something faster. We need to make Crane himself unreliable. Make it so that anything he releases gets treated as fabrication before anyone even checks the data. How? His release was expedited, paperwork flagged, signatures that didn't match. Decker found that 12 hours ago. What if that wasn't a clerical error? What if Crane had help getting out early? You think someone sprung him? I think someone wanted him out. And if I can prove that, if I can show that his release was orchestrated, that he was deployed rather than paroled, then everything he says, everything he releases, gets filtered through that context. He's not a whistleblower. He's an asset. He's a weapon aimed at the people who put him away. By who? Nora asked. She'd stopped typing. Her face was pale in the monitor light. That's what I need to find out. And I need to find out in the next 12 hours, because after that, Knox is going to run out of things to talk about. And Crane is going to walk out of that motel room and do whatever he's been planning to do since the day they stamped his release papers. Griff turned back to his monitors. His fingers hit the keyboard and didn't stop. Sarah watched the data stream across his screens. Federal records, prison transfer logs, parole board minutes, phone records, financial transactions. A cascade of information pouring into Griff's workstation like water through a breach in a dam. Sarah's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at the screen. Tick-tock, Sarah. She showed it to Nora. Nora's jaw tightened. She turned back to the keyboard and typed faster. 7 hours passed. Dawn came and went. A gray, reluctant light that seeped through the garage windows without warmth or conviction, as if the sun itself wasn't sure it wanted to participate in this day. Nobody ate. Decker made coffee at 6, 7, 8, 9, pot after pot, each one worse than the last, each one consumed with the grim efficiency of people fueling a machine that couldn't be allowed to stop. At 11:14 a.m., Griff pushed back from his desk and said, "Found it." The room stopped. Crane's release was processed through a federal corrections liaison office in Virginia. The officer who signed off on the expedited paperwork is a man named Victor Sable. Sable doesn't work for corrections. He works for a private intelligence firm called Meridian Strategic, same firm Knox used to do contract security work for. Same firm that connected Knox to Nora 9 years ago. The information hit the room like a concussive wave. Sarah felt it in her chest, not the data itself, but the implication. The terrible geometric precision of what Griff was saying, the same firm, the same network, the same invisible hand that had connected Knox to Nora had also released Crane from prison. Knox, Decker said. His voice was flat, dangerous. Knox's old firm released Crane. Not Knox, the firm. But the connection is there. Meridian Strategic placed Crane in a motel 14 miles from Iron Haven. They wanted this confrontation. They wanted these files to surface. Why? Because those 237 identities include people that Meridian helped disappear. Not through Nora, through their own operations. She was freelance. Meridian is institutional. If those names go public, it doesn't just expose Crane's network. It exposes Meridian's. And Meridian would rather burn it all down and blame it on a convicted felon than let anyone trace the operation back to them. So Crane's a patsy, Torque said. Crane's a delivery system. He thinks he's acting on his own. He thinks this is about revenge. But he was released, positioned, and aimed at Nora like a weapon. The text message, the 48 hours, the motel 14 miles away. That's not a plan Crane built in prison. That's a plan someone built around him. The side door crashed open. Knox stood in the doorway. He looked like he'd been dragged behind a truck and set on fire. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder. His knuckles were split, both hands, blood drying in the creases between his fingers. The scar on his face was vivid, almost glowing against skin that was gray with exhaustion. His eyes were the only part of him that looked alive, burning with a focused, concentrated fury that made the air around him feel combustible. "Crane's gone," Knox said. Griff stood up. "What do you mean gone?" "I mean gone. I stepped out to take a call from Decker at 0600. When I came back, the room was empty, bathroom window. He went out the back and into the trees." "The call from Decker," Torque said slowly. "Decker called you at 6 this morning?" Everyone looked at Decker. Decker's face went white. "I didn't call Knox at 6, Decker said. "I haven't called Knox since last night." The implication landed like a fist. Someone had spoofed Decker's number. Someone had pulled Knox out of that room at exactly the right moment to give Crane a window. Someone who had access to their communications. Someone who was watching. Meridian. "The garage phone," Griff said suddenly. He was already moving, pulling cables, checking connections. When Decker called Harlan last night, the outreach records, the federal database search, he used the garage landline. If Meridian is monitoring Harlan's communications, they heard everything. They know we have the files. They know Nora's building corrupted copies. They know our entire play. Knox closed his eyes. Just for a moment. 2 seconds, maybe 3. When he opened them, the fury was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer hot. It was cold, compressed. The kind of anger that doesn't explode but hardens into something structural, something you can build on. Meridian is a private intelligence firm with federal contracts, Knox said. They don't operate on American soil. They don't run operations against American citizens. Everything they've done here, releasing Crane, positioning him, monitoring our communications, is illegal. Not gray area illegal, prison illegal. Which means they can't afford for any of this to surface, Griff said. Which means they're not just going to let Crane release the files. They're going to clean up. Clean up what? Everything, everyone. Crane is a loose end. Nora is a loose end. Knox, you're a loose end. Anyone who can connect Meridian to those 237 identities is a target. Including us, Decker said. Including a 13-year-old girl sitting in this garage, Torque added. The silence that followed was the heaviest Sarah had ever experienced. Not just quiet, pressurized. The silence of a room where every person has simultaneously understood that the thing they're facing is bigger than they are, more dangerous than they prepared for, and closer than they thought. Knox looked at Sarah. She looked back. His split knuckles, her steady hands, his scar, her eyes. Gray-green, inherited from a man who was now somewhere in the winter woods, running from the same people who were coming for all of them. "We need Maya," Knox said. The name hung in the air. Sarah didn't recognize it, but she saw the reaction it produced. Decker's head snapping up, Torque uncrossing his arms, Griff's fingers pausing on the keyboard for the first time in hours. "Maya Cross hasn't been active in 3 years," Decker said. "I know. She left after the Ashland thing. She said she was done." "I know. Knox, she specifically told you, and I'm quoting, that if you ever called her again, she'd burn this garage to the ground." "I know." Knox pulled out his phone. But Maya Cross is the only investigative journalist in this country who has published stories on Meridian Strategic and survived. She knows their structure, she knows their methods, and she knows how to take what Griff found and turn it into something that a federal prosecutor can't ignore. He dialed, held the phone to his ear. The room waited. It rang 5 times, 6, 7. Sarah counted each one, each ring a small eternity, each pause between rings a space where the future forked into two paths, one where someone answered and one where they didn't. On the eighth ring, a woman's voice, sharp, irritated, the voice of someone who had been sleeping and resented the interruption with every fiber of her being. "This better be someone telling me my house is on fire." Maya. "It's Knox." A pause. Long enough to hold a breath. Long enough to hold a decision. "I told you never to call me." "I know. I need you anyway." Knox. 237 people are going to die or disappear if I don't get help in the next 48 hours. Meridian Strategic is cleaning house. I have digital evidence, original files, and a 13-year-old girl sitting in my garage who hasn't slept in 24 hours and is handling this better than anyone else in the room. I need you, Maya. I don't have anyone else to ask. Silence on the line. Sarah could hear it. Not just the absence of sound, but the active muscular silence of a person wrestling with something internal, fighting a battle between the part of them that had walked away and the part that had never been able to. 48 hours, Maya said. Possibly less. Meridian Strategic, you're sure? Griff has the documentation, prison release records, spoofed communications, the whole thread. Another silence, then, I'm 6 hours away, I'll be there by dark. Don't do anything stupid until I arrive. Can't promise that. Try. The line went dead. Knox lowered the phone. He looked at the room. At Griff, at Decker, at Torque, at Nora bent over her keyboard with corrupted files stacking up on the screen, at Sarah sitting in her folding chair with her knees drawn up and her eyes wide open and her face showing nothing because showing something would cost more energy than she had. Everyone listens, Knox said. Crane is in the wind. Meridian is watching. We have between now and sundown to finish what Nora's building, compile what Griff's found, and prepare this garage for the possibility that people with federal resources are going to come through that door. And if they do? Decker asked. Knox looked at him. The scar. The split knuckles. The eyes that burned with something that wasn't anger anymore, but something older and harder. The determination of a man who'd spent his entire adult life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves and had never once, not once, succeeded without bleeding for it. Then they find out what happens when you threaten the family of men who've already lost everything else. He turned and walked into his office. The door closed. Through the frosted glass, Sarah saw his silhouette sit down at his desk, put his head in his hands, and stay there. Still, bent, carrying a weight that no one could see but everyone in the room could feel. Sarah looked at her phone. No new messages from Crane. No new messages from unknown numbers. Just the clock ticking down. 53 hours remaining on a deadline that had started with 6 words on a dead phone screen in a frozen parking lot and had grown into something that involved 237 lives, a private intelligence firm, a brotherhood of wounded men, and a 13-year-old girl who was beginning to understand that the only thing more dangerous than a secret is the moment it stops being one. She picked up the cold coffee, drank it. It tasted like nothing. Outside, snow continued to fall on Felton Ridge, silent, indifferent, covering everything in a layer of white that made the world look clean, even though nothing underneath it was clean. Nothing was simple. Nothing was safe. And somewhere in that white landscape, Elliot Crane was moving through the trees toward whatever destination Meridian Strategic had prepared for him, carrying in his head the names of 237 people who didn't know they were in danger, not knowing that he was in danger too, not knowing that the men who'd released him from prison had done so with the full intention of burying him alongside everyone else when the operation was finished. The clock in the garage read 11:47 a.m. Maya Cross was 6 hours away. Crane was somewhere in the woods. Meridian was watching. And Sarah Mercer, 13 years old, daughter of a forger and a criminal, ward of a brotherhood she'd only just begun to understand, sat in a folding chair in a garage that smelled like oil and leather and burnt coffee, and waited for the war to come to her door. It was already on its way. Maya Cross arrived at Iron Haven Garage at 5:42 p.m., driving a dented Subaru with press credentials expired since 2023 taped to the sun visor and a laptop bag slung across the passenger seat that looked like it had survived a war, which, in a sense, it had. She was 41 years old, lean in the way that people who forget to eat are lean, with short dark hair that she'd clearly been cutting herself, and eyes that moved across the garage interior with the systematic precision of someone cataloging exits, threats, and the fastest route between any 2 points in the room. She wore no jewelry, no makeup. A canvas jacket over a flannel shirt, jeans, boots that had seen better decades. She looked like a woman who'd deliberately removed every non-essential element from her life and had arrived at something stripped down and functional and vaguely dangerous. She didn't greet anyone. She walked to Griff's workstation, set her laptop bag on the desk, and said, "Show me." Griff showed her. For 45 minutes, Maya read. She scrolled through the prison release documents, the Meridian strategic connections, the spoofed phone records, the corrupted identity files Nora had spent the day building. She read with the focused intensity of a predator tracking scent. No questions, no reactions, no sound except the click of the mouse and the occasional sharp intake of breath that meant she'd found something that mattered. When she finished, she closed the laptop and looked at Knox, who was standing in his office doorway with his arms crossed and his split knuckles wrapped in gauze that Decker had applied 2 hours ago with the rough tenderness of a man who'd bandaged wounds in places he'd never talk about. "You're an idiot," Maya said. "I know. Keeping those files for 9 years, sitting on 237 identities like they were baseball cards. Do you have any idea what would happen if—" "I know, Maya." "Then why?" Knox didn't answer immediately. He looked at the floor, at his boots, at the oil stains that had been on this concrete since before he owned the building. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than Sarah had ever heard it. Not weak, not defeated, but reduced. The voice of a man who'd carried something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, not because he chose to, but because his arms gave out. "Because I thought I was the only one who could protect her, and I was wrong." Maya studied him for a long moment. Whatever history existed between them, the Ashland thing Decker had mentioned, the threat to burn the garage down, the 3 years of silence, it lived in that look. Complex, layered, unresolved, but not unfamiliar. The way two people regard each other when they've seen each other at their worst and are deciding whether to show up anyway. "Okay," Maya said. "Here's what we're going to do." She laid it out in under 10 minutes. No wasted words, no unnecessary detail. The plan was surgical, built on the evidence Griff had compiled, the corrupted files Nora had created, and Maya's own knowledge of Meridian Strategic's operational structure from the investigation she'd published 3 years ago that had ended her career and very nearly ended her life. The evidence would go to 3 federal prosecutors simultaneously, not 1, not 2, 3, in separate jurisdictions, each receiving a different piece of the puzzle so that no single office could suppress it. The corrupted identity files would be submitted alongside the originals with a detailed forensic analysis proving the originals' chain of custody, making Crane's copies inadmissible by contrast. And the Meridian connection, the expedited release, the spoofed communications, the positioning of Crane 14 miles from Iron Haven would be packaged as a separate complaint filed with the Department of Justice Inspector General's office, bypassing the normal channels that Meridian's contacts could intercept. "This works if the evidence holds," Maya said, "and if Crane doesn't release the names before the filings go through." "How long?" Knox asked. "The filings can go out tonight, digital submission, but the injunction to freeze Crane's data, that requires a judge. Tomorrow morning at the earliest." "We don't have until tomorrow morning," Griff said. "Crane's in the wind. Meridian knows our play. If they're cleaning house, they'll move tonight." "Then we need Crane," Maya said. "He's gone," Knox said. "Went out a bathroom window 12 hours ago." "He's not gone. He's repositioned." A man who spent 13 years planning a confrontation with the mother of his child doesn't run away from it. He's somewhere close, waiting for his moment. The question is whether we find him first or he finds us. Sarah's phone buzzed on Griff's desk. Everyone in the room went still. She picked it up. "Unknown number. Same one as before. I'm ready to talk. Just you. Abandoned rail yard. 1 hour." She showed the screen to the room. Knox's jaw tightened. Decker shook his head. Torque, leaning against the far wall, said nothing, but his hands dropped to his sides with the readiness of a man who'd been waiting for this specific piece of information. "No," Nora said. The word was absolute. a wall. "He won't come to us," Sarah said. "He's been setting the terms since the beginning. The text message, the 48 hours, the motel. He chooses the place, the time, the conditions. That's how he operates. That's how he's always operated. You're not going to an abandoned rail yard alone." "I'm not going alone, that's the point." Sarah looked at Knox. "You said you brought me because I deserve to be close enough to know. Well, now I need to be close enough to end this." "End it how?" Nora demanded. "He's a convicted criminal who... He's a man sitting in the cold waiting for his daughter to show up so he can feel like he won. That's all he has left. Meridian used him, and he doesn't even know it. The files don't matter anymore. Mom corrupted them. The leverage is gone. The only thing Crane has left is this, the idea that I'll come to him because blood is stronger than everything else." "And you want to prove him wrong," Griff said. "I want to give him the chance to prove himself wrong. And while he's talking to me, Maya files the evidence and Meridian's operation gets exposed before they can clean anything up." The room was silent for 10 seconds, 15, 20. Sarah counted in her head the way she counted everything. Steps in a dark house, digits on a combination lock, rings on a telephone, the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. Knox looked at Maya. Maya looked at Griff. Griff looked at Nora. The chain of glances moved through the room like a current, each person adding their weight to the calculation, each person arriving at the same conclusion through different arithmetic. "I go with her," Knox said. "Decker and Torque on the perimeter. Griff stays here with Nora and finishes the filings. Maya sends everything the moment we have Crane's location confirmed." "And if Meridian shows up?" Decker asked. "Then they find us in the place we chose, not the place they expected. Rail yard gives us cover, boxcars, sight lines. Better than sitting in this garage waiting for them to come through the door." Knox pulled on his jacket, zipped it over his cut, grabbed the keys to his Harley from the hook near the door. His movements were measured but urgent, the controlled acceleration of a man who'd been still for too long and was built for motion. "Sarah." Nora's voice was stretched thin, a wire carrying more current than it was rated for. She crossed the garage and put her hands on Sarah's shoulders. Her fingers were stained with ink from the corrupted documents she'd been building all day. Her eyes were red. Her face was a landscape of exhaustion. "Come back." "I will." "That's not a suggestion. That's a condition. You come back to this garage, you come back to me." Sarah put her hand over her mother's. The ink stains on Nora's fingers pressed against Sarah's knuckles. Two hands that had built 237 lives. One pair that created the identities, one pair that would grow up carrying the weight of that legacy. "I'll come back," Sarah said. They rode to the rail yard in formation, Knox leading, Sarah behind him on his Harley with her arms locked around his midsection, Decker and Torque flanking on either side. The engines were loud in the evening air, the sound rolling across the frozen fields east of Felton Ridge like distant thunder. The sky was the color of old metal, gray, heavy, pressing down on the landscape with a weight that felt personal. The abandoned rail yard sat 3 miles outside town, a sprawling grid of rusted tracks and decaying infrastructure that the Norfolk Southern had decommissioned 8 years ago and left to rot. Boxcars in various states of collapse lined the sidings, some upright, some tilted at angles that suggested a strong wind would finish what neglect had started. Gravel crunched beneath their tires. The air smelled like rust and frozen creosote and the particular emptiness of places that had once been essential and were now forgotten. Knox killed his engine at the east end of the yard, near a switching tower that had lost its windows and most of its roof. Decker and Torque peeled off, shadows moving between boxcars, taking positions that covered the approach from the road and the tree line beyond. They disappeared with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this kind of work in places where disappearing was the difference between coming home and not coming home. Sarah climbed off the bike. Her legs were stiff from the cold. Her hands were numb. She stood in the gravel between 2 rusted boxcars and looked down the length of the rail yard, where the tracks converged in the distance like lines drawn toward a vanishing point. A figure stood at the convergence, Elliot Crane, alone. Hands in the pockets of a dark coat, no bag, no phone visible. Just a man standing on frozen gravel at the point where the tracks met, waiting for the daughter he'd spent 13 years imagining. Knox positioned himself 10 feet behind Sarah, close enough to reach her, far enough to give her space. "You came," Crane said as Sarah walked toward him. His voice carried in the cold air with the clarity of sound in empty spaces. No walls to absorb it, no warmth to muffle it, just voice and distance and the occasional groan of metal as the wind moved through the boxcars. "You knew I would." "I hoped." "That's not the same thing." She stopped 15 feet from him. The distance was intentional, close enough to see his face, far enough that the space between them remained a physical fact. He looked different than he had at the motel, smaller. The lean intensity was still there, but it had been blunted by something, cold or fatigue, or the slow realization that the plan he'd constructed in his prison cell was not surviving contact with reality. "I'm not here to forgive you," Sarah said. "I didn't ask for forgiveness. And I'm not here because you're my father. Biology doesn't mean what you think it means." "Then why?" Sarah looked at him, at this man who carried half her genetic material and none of her history, whose eyes were the same color as hers, whose jaw was shaped like hers, whose hands moved with the same deliberate economy as hers. She looked at him and felt the pull of blood, the ancient irrational gravity that connects people who share DNA, and she chose, consciously and deliberately, to acknowledge it without surrendering to it. "Because you're being used," she said, "and you don't know it." Crane's expression shifted. A micro-adjustment, eyebrows drawing together, jaw tightening, the tiny muscular signals of a man whose certainty had just encountered an obstacle. "Used by whom?" "Meridian Strategic, the firm that expedited your release. They didn't let you out because you served your time. They let you out because they needed someone to trigger this. The files, the confrontation, the exposure. They want the 237 identities burned because some of those people are theirs. People they help disappear through their own operations. You're the delivery system. You do the damage. They clean up the evidence, and you go back to prison while they continue operating." That's a story. It's documented. Prison release records, spoofed phone calls. A corrections officer named Victor Sable who works for Meridian, not the federal government. Griff found everything, and right now, as we're standing here, every piece of that evidence is being filed with 3 separate federal prosecutors and the DOJ Inspector General. Crane's face changed, not gradually, all at once, the way weather changes in open country. The confidence that had been his armor since the motel, the calm certainty that had unnerved Knox and terrified Nora, collapsed inward like a structure losing its central support. What remained was not weakness, but confusion. The raw, destabilizing bewilderment of a man who has just discovered that the ground he's been standing on was never ground at all. "You're lying." "I'm 13. I haven't had time to learn how to lie well enough to fool you." A sound reached them from the road. Not motorcycles. Something heavier. An SUV engine, maybe 2, approaching from the west at a speed that suggested urgency rather than caution. Knox moved. He stepped forward and put himself between Sarah and the direction of the sound, his body blocking her sightline to the road. Decker appeared from between 2 boxcars to the north. Torque materialized at the south end of the yard, his silver beard catching the last gray light of the dying afternoon. "That's not us," Decker said. "Meridian," Knox said. 2 black SUVs pulled into the rail yard entrance, headlights cutting through the dusk. They stopped 60 yards away, engines idling. Doors opened. Men stepped out, 4 of them, wearing the unremarkable civilian clothing of people whose jobs required them to be forgettable. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of a team that had worked together before, spreading out across the gravel with the patient geometry of containment. Crane watched them approach. His face had gone pale. His hands, still in his coat pockets, were trembling. Sarah could see the fabric of his coat moving with each tremor, the vibration of a man who just realized that the people who set him free had come to put him back in a different kind of cage. "They're here for the files," Crane said. "They're here for all of us," Knox said. Knox stepped forward into the open space between the boxcars. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't posture. He just stood there, a scarred man in a leather cut with bandaged hands and exhausted eyes, blocking the path between 4 professionals and a 13-year-old girl with the quiet immovability of someone who'd done this calculation before and knew exactly what it cost. "You're on private property," Knox said. The lie was deliberate. The rail yard belonged to no one, but the declaration established a boundary that the approaching men would have to acknowledge or violate, and either choice revealed something about their intentions. The lead man stopped 20 yards away, clean-shaven, mid-40s. The face of someone who'd been trained to look unremarkable and had succeeded so thoroughly that the unremarkableness itself became a kind of signature. "We're here for Elliot Crane," the man said, "and the files he's carrying." "He's not carrying files, and he's not going with you. That's not your decision. It's the only decision I'm making tonight. You want to test it, go ahead. But you should know that every piece of evidence connecting Meridian Strategic to Crane's expedited release, to the spoofed communications targeting this club, and to the operation to burn 237 protected identities was filed with federal prosecutors 11 minutes ago. Whatever you came here to clean up, it's already out of the building." The lead man's expression didn't change, but his body did. A subtle shift in weight, a redistribution of balance that Sarah recognized because she'd been studying body language all her life without knowing she was studying it. The shift of a man recalculating. He reached for his phone, made a call, spoke in a voice too low to hear. The conversation lasted 40 seconds. When he hung up, he looked at Knox with an expression that held neither anger nor defeat, but the cold pragmatism of a professional who'd just been told that the mission parameters had changed. "This isn't over," the man said. "For you it is," Knox replied. "For Meridian, it's just starting. You've got about 6 hours before the Inspector General's office opens those files. I'd use that time wisely." The men retreated to their vehicles. The doors closed. The engines revved. The SUVs backed out of the rail yard and disappeared down the road, taillights fading into the dusk like embers dying in cold air. The yard was silent. Wind moved through the boxcars. Gravel settled. Knox stood with his fists at his sides and his breath fogging in the air, and his body slowly, incrementally, releasing the tension that had held it upright for the last 36 hours. Crane was sitting on the rail, not standing anymore. Sitting, with his elbows on his knees and his head down, the posture of a man whose infrastructure had been pulled out from beneath him. He looked up when Sarah walked toward him. The gray-green eyes, her eyes, were wet. "I didn't know," he said. "I believe you. I thought, when I got out, I thought I could—" "I know what you thought. You thought you could come here and make me hate her and love you instead. You thought blood was enough. Isn't it? No?" The word was simple. Final. Not cruel. Sarah didn't have cruelty in her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But definitive. The kind of word that closes a door and turns the lock and puts the key somewhere that only one person can reach. Crane looked at her for a long time. The wind blew between them. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded on an active line, a long, mournful note that traveled across the frozen landscape and faded into the trees. "You're better than both of us," Crane said. "Better than me and better than her." "I'm not better. I'm just not finished yet." She turned and walked back to Knox. She didn't look behind her. She heard Crane stand, heard his boots on the gravel, heard him walk toward the far end of the rail yard where the tracks disappeared into the darkness. She didn't know where he was going. She didn't ask. Knox put his hand on her shoulder, heavy, warm. The hand of a man who'd spent his whole life carrying things and had just learned that the most important thing you can carry is the willingness to let go of the things you shouldn't have held in the first place. "Let's go home," he said. They rode back to Iron Haven in the dark. The engines filled the silence between them. The cold was still there. It would be there for months. This was December in Felton Ridge. The cold was a resident, not a visitor. But it felt different now. Not hostile, not personal. Just cold. Just weather. Just the world doing what the world does without caring who's in it. The garage was lit when they arrived, every light on. The roll-up door was open. Nora was standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself and her face raw and expectant and terrified. Maya was behind her, laptop open on Griff's desk, the screen showing confirmation receipts from 3 federal prosecutor offices and the DOJ Inspector General. Filed, received, time-stamped. Sarah climbed off the bike. Her legs were shaking. Her hands were numb. She walked across the gravel lot toward her mother, and the distance between them, 30 feet of frozen ground, felt like the longest distance she'd ever crossed. Nora met her halfway. She didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around her daughter and held on with the desperate strength of a woman who'd spent 13 years holding everything together and had finally, in this moment, allowed herself to fall apart. Sarah held her back. She pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and breathed in the smell of ink and coffee and the specific warmth of a body that had been awake for 36 hours, running on nothing but fear and love. She closed her eyes. She let the trembling come, all the trembling she'd been holding back since the text message on the phone screen, since the name Lydia Kessler, since the motel and the rail yard, and the gray-green eyes that looked like hers. She shook, and Nora held her, and neither of them said a word because some things don't have words. They only have arms and warmth and the willingness to stand in a frozen parking lot and not let go. The next 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that Sarah would later recognize as the specific tempo of healing, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the slow, unglamorous kind that happens in real life, in real buildings, among real people who are too tired for speeches and too damaged for easy resolution. Maya's filings triggered a federal investigation into Meridian Strategic that would take months to unfold. 2 agents visited Iron Haven Garage 4 days after the rail yard, asking questions that Knox answered with the same economy he applied to everything: minimum words, maximum information, no embellishment. Sarah sat in the corner during the interview, watching, memorizing, filing everything away in the cabinet in her mind that was no longer locked. Knox surrendered the original identity files to federal custody, all 237 folders, carried out of his office in 4 cardboard boxes by agents who signed chain of custody forms on Griff's desk. Knox watched them go with an expression that might have been relief or might have been grief. The face of a man watching the last piece of his armor being carried away, knowing that without it, he was more vulnerable but also more honest than he'd been in 9 years. Nora filed paperwork to formally exit the witness protection program she'd already been functionally outside of for years. The process was slow and bureaucratic and required her to sit in offices and answer questions about a life she'd lived under a different name, and Sarah went with her every time. They drove to appointments in the van, the same van that had carried them to Iron Haven Garage on the night everything started, and they talked. Not about everything, not about the hard things, not yet, but about enough. About the next step and the one after that. About the house on Birch Street and whether they'd stay. About school and whether Sarah wanted to go back or take a leave. About Elliot Crane. They talked about him once, a single conversation on the drive home from a federal office in the city, Nora's hands on the wheel, Sarah's feet on the dash, the heater running and the windows fogging and the world outside reduced to a blur of gray and white. He wasn't always what he became, Nora said. I know. That doesn't excuse anything. I know that too. You asked me if I loved him. The answer is still yes. But love doesn't mean what I thought it meant when I was 25. It doesn't mean you stay. Sometimes it means you leave, sometimes it means you testify in a federal courtroom when you're 7 months pregnant and you know that the man you're putting away is the father of the child inside you. Sometimes love looks like betrayal because the alternative is worse. Sarah watched the road. Where is he now? I don't know. The federal agent said he surfaced in Vermont. They're monitoring him as part of the Meridian investigation. He's a witness now, not a suspect. The same system that he tried to burn down is the system that's protecting him. Is that ironic or just sad? Both. Most things are. They drove in silence for a while. The heater clicked. The tires hummed. The world scrolled past the windows like a film that neither of them had to narrate because they'd both already lived it. Sarah started spending afternoons at Iron Haven Garage. Not because she was told to, not because she needed protection, because she wanted to be there, in the warmth of a building that smelled like oil and metal, surrounded by men who moved through their days with a quiet purpose that she'd come to understand was not indifference or stoicism, but the specific gravity of people who'd seen the worst things and had chosen, deliberately and repeatedly, to build something instead of destroy something. She sat at Griff's workstation and learned to read code. Not well, not yet, but enough to understand the architecture of the systems he built, the logic trees and decision matrices that turned raw data into something useful. Griff taught her the way he did everything, without performance, without ego, just information transferred from one person to another through proximity and patience. She learned to change the oil on a Harley. Decker showed her, kneeling on the concrete floor with a drain pan and a socket wrench, his hands black with grease, his voice gruff and instructional. He didn't talk about feelings. He talked about torque specifications and filter sizes and the correct viscosity for winter riding. But the act of teaching was itself a form of communication. A man who'd survived things he couldn't discuss, offering a girl who'd survived things she shouldn't have had to, the only currency he had. Skill, attention, time. Knox watched from across the shop. He always watched. That hadn't changed. But the watching was different now. Less guarded, less strategic. The watching of a man who'd surrendered his leverage and his secrets and his files and had found, to his apparent surprise, that the thing left over was enough. That protection didn't require control. That keeping someone safe didn't mean keeping them in the dark. One morning in January, Sarah arrived at the garage before anyone else. She let herself in with the key Knox had given her, a brass key on a plain ring handed to her without ceremony across the workbench on a Tuesday, accompanied by nothing more than a nod that meant, "This is yours now." She made coffee. She turned on the lights. She sat in her folding chair and listened to the building wake up around her, the creak of cold metal expanding as the heaters kicked on, the hum of Griff's servers in the back room, the distant sound of traffic on Route 9 as Felton Ridge started another day. Torque arrived first. He nodded at her, poured coffee, sat on his crate, started cleaning a part she couldn't identify. Decker came next, grunted a greeting, picked up where he'd left off on a transmission rebuild. Griff slid in silently, 3 monitors glowing within minutes, headphones around his neck, already typing before his jacket hit the chair. Knox arrived last. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the room, the men working, the girl in the folding chair, the coffee brewing, the lights on, the building alive with the ordinary rhythm of people who had somewhere to be and someone to be it with. He nodded at Sarah. She nodded back. He walked to his office. The door closed. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette sit down at his desk, and this time his head didn't go into his hands. He just sat there, upright, still, looking at whatever was in front of him with the steady gaze of a man who'd finally stopped carrying something he should have put down years ago. Sarah pulled out her phone. No messages from unknown numbers. No threats. No deadlines. Just the home screen with its default wallpaper, the mountain range she'd never visited. She looked at it for a moment, then opened the settings and changed it. She took a photo of the garage interior, the workbenches, the bikes, the fluorescent lights, the oil stains, the coffee maker, the folding chair. Nothing beautiful, nothing picturesque, just a room where people showed up every day and fixed broken things and drank bad coffee and didn't leave when the road turned dark. She set it as her wallpaper, locked the phone, put it in her pocket. Outside, the first engine of the day rumbled to life. Torque testing a rebuilt carburetor, the Harley's growl reverberating through the cinder block walls and out into the January air, where it mixed with the cold and the silence and the faint smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet, but was coming, always coming. That was the thing about winter in Felton Ridge. It never finished. It just changed shape, shifted weight, found new ways to remind you that the world was cold and hard and indifferent to your plans. But inside the garage it was warm, and the coffee was terrible, and the lights were on. And Sarah Mercer, 13 years old, daughter of a forger and a ghost, ward of no one and family to everyone in this room, was exactly where she was supposed to be.